The air inside Zephyr's Rest was thick with smoke and the smell of a dozen different alien drinks. The tavern sat deep in the belly of Nexus Prime, the biggest trade station in this part of the galaxy. Beings from every corner of known space came here to drink, trade stories, and forget about their troubles for a while. Tonight was no different. The place buzzed with voices speaking in languages that would hurt human ears. Strange creatures filled every table and booth. Some had many arms. Others had no arms at all. Some breathed air. Others wore masks filled with gases that would kill most life forms. At the center table sat Captain Thexka of the Krillian Empire. His red skin gleamed under the tavern lights, and his 4 arms gestured wildly as he spoke. The Krillians were known across the galaxy as warriors. Their ships could crack planets in half with their weapons. And then, Thexka said, his voice booming over the crowd, we turned their moon into dust. One shot from our Star Destroyer, and an entire world satellite was gone. The enemy surrendered before the debris even hit their planet. The other, aliens at his table made sounds of approval. A creature that looked like a giant mantis clicked its mandibles together. This was Zix Prime, speaking for the Vex Collective. The Vex were a hive-mind species. When they went to war, millions of them moved as one. Impressive, Zix Prime said in its clicking voice. But the Vex understand true warfare. We once fought the Silicon Lords for 300 years. Every battle was coordinated across 17 star systems. Our enemies could not predict our moves because we thought as one mind. In the end, we absorbed their entire civilization. A being made of living crystal spoke next. The Shardak were ancient, older than most species in the galaxy. They moved, slowly, but lived for thousands of years. When they went to war, they planned battles that lasted centuries. Both of your conflicts were brief, the Shardak said, its voice like glass breaking. We fought the Shadow Fleet for 800 years. We turned entire star systems into fortresses. We built weapons that could destroy time itself. That is true warfare. From the corner of the tavern came a wet, bubbling sound. The deep-born delegate was laughing. The aquatic creature lived in a tank of green liquid, speaking through a translation device. Surface dwellers always think small, the deep-born said. We conquered the ocean worlds of the spiral arm. Battles fought in the crushing depths where your ships would be crushed like toys. We drowned entire civilizations in the blood of sea monsters. That is warfare worthy of respect. The arguments went on like this for hours. Each species tried to top the others with tales of their greatest military victories. Ships that could destroy suns, armies that numbered in the billions, wars that lasted for millennia. The aliens drank and boasted, each one certain that their species was the greatest warrior race in the galaxy. In a small booth near the back wall, Jake Murphy sat alone. He was human, which made him almost invisible in this crowd. Humans were new to the galactic community. They had only developed faster than light travel 50 years ago. Most aliens saw them as primitive newcomers who had barely crawled out of their home system. Jake was a freight pilot. He hauled cargo between human colonies and alien worlds. It was honest work, but it did not make him rich or famous. He was average height for a human with brown hair and tired eyes. He wore a simple flight suit that had seen better days. Nothing about him suggested he was anything special. He sipped his drink slowly and listened to the aliens argue. The liquid in his glass was blue and tasted like metal, but it was the only thing on the menu that would not poison him. He had heard these kinds of conversations before. Wherever aliens gathered, they always ended up comparing their military. The tavern keeper was a Centaurian named Vel 9. His people were known for their wisdom and long memories. They kept records of everything that happened in the galaxy. Vel 9 had run this tavern for over 200 years. He had heard every boast and every war story that spacers could tell. Vel 9 noticed the human sitting alone. He had seen Jake here before, always quiet, always listening. The Centaurian had heard rumors about human history, whispers of conflicts that seemed impossible for such a young species, but he had never heard the full story. At the center table, Thexka was getting louder. The Krillian had consumed several bottles of his home world's strongest drink. His red skin was now glowing with intoxication. You know what I find amusing? Thexka said, his forearms spreading wide. All this talk of great wars and mighty conquests, and we have not heard from our newest member. He pointed one clawed finger at Jake. The entire tavern turned to look at the human. Conversation stopped. Even the background music seemed to quiet down. The human sits there so quietly. Thexka continued. Tell us, little mammal, what great wars has your species fought? What mighty enemies have you conquered? Some of the aliens laughed. Others just stared. Humans were known throughout the galaxy as peaceful traders and diplomats. They avoided conflicts and preferred to solve problems with words rather than weapons. Most aliens assumed this was because humans were too weak to fight real wars. Jake did not look up from his drink. He had heard these insults before. Being human in alien space meant dealing with constant mockery. Most of the time, he just ignored it and went about his business. But Thexka was not finished. The drunk Krillian stood up, swaying slightly. His voice carried to every corner of the tavern. I have heard about human conflicts, he said with a sneer. You fight with chemical explosives and metal projectiles. Your ships cannot even leave your own system without help. You have never faced real warfare. You have never fought against a truly dangerous enemy. The tavern erupted in laughter. Even the normally reserved Shardak made sounds of amusement. The idea of humans as warriors was apparently hilarious to everyone present. Jake's knuckles went white around his glass. Vel 9 noticed this from behind the bar. The old Centaurian had lived long enough to recognize dangerous signs. He had seen that look before, in the eyes of beings who had witnessed terrible things. The laughter continued for several minutes. Finally, Thexka raised one arm for silence. Come now, human, he said. Surely your species has some tale of conquest to share, some glorious victory over a fearsome foe. Or do you only fight amongst yourselves on that little blue world of yours? The silence that followed was different from before. It was heavier, more tense. Jake finally looked up from his drink. His eyes were calm, but there was something in them that made several aliens shift uncomfortably in their seats. Vel 9 leaned forward across the bar. He had a feeling that the night was about to become very interesting indeed. Jake Murphy set his glass down on the table with a soft click. The sound seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet tavern. Every alien eye was on him now. Some looked amused, others curious, and a few seemed almost predatory, like they sensed weakness. Thexkai was still standing at the center table, his forearms crossed over his broad chest. The Krillian's red skin glowed brighter with each passing moment. His people were known for their temper, and the alcohol was making it worse. Well, Thexka demanded. We are waiting, human. Tell us about your mighty wars. Tell us about your great victories. The other aliens began to join in. Zix Prime, the mantis-like Vex, clicked its mandibles together in what passed for laughter among its kind. Perhaps they fought the insects on their world, Zix Prime said. I have heard human worlds have small creatures that bite. Very dangerous enemies indeed. The Shardak delegate made a sound like breaking glass. For its people, this was the equivalent of chuckling. Maybe they battled the weather, the crystal being said. I understand their planet has storms. Surely that counts as warfare for such a primitive species. Even the Deepborn in its tank of green liquid was making bubbling sounds of amusement. Did they fight the fish in their oceans? It asked, through its translator. How brave they must be to challenge creatures without weapons or technology. The laughter grew louder. More aliens joined in the mockery. Jake heard insults in a dozen different languages. Some he understood, others he could only guess at. But the meaning was clear enough. A group of reptilian traders at a nearby table began making hissing sounds that passed for laughter among their kind. One of them spoke up. I heard humans still use projectile weapons, the reptilian said. They throw small pieces of metal at each other. How quaint. My people stopped using such toys 10,000 years ago. Another alien, something that looked like a walking tree, creaked its wooden limbs together. They probably count arguments as battles, the tree thing said. Maybe they wage war with harsh words and hurt feelings. The insults kept coming. Each species seemed eager to add their own joke about human weakness. They talked about humans like they were children playing at war, like they had never seen real conflict or faced real danger. Jake sat still through it all. His hands were flat, on the table now, but Vel 9 could see the tension in his shoulders. The old Centaurian had seen enough fights start in his tavern to know the signs. He began to quietly move bottles and glasses away from the edge of the bar. Thexka was enjoying himself now. The Krillian captain had an audience, and he was not going to waste it. He began to pace around his table, gesturing wildly with all 4 arms. "You know what I think?" Thexka said, his voice carrying to every corner of the tavern. "I think humans avoid real war because they know they would lose. They hide behind their diplomats and their trade agreements because they are too scared to fight." Several aliens made sounds of agreement. A slug-like creature that breathed methane gas spoke through its environmental suit. "Cowards," it said in a wet, gurgling voice. "They pretend to be peaceful, but really they are just afraid." The Vex delegate clicked its mandibles again. "The hive mind has analyzed human behavior," Zix Prime said. "They always surrender before fighting. They prefer to negotiate because they know they cannot win through strength." Jake's jaw tightened. His knuckles went white again as his hands curled into fists on the table. Several aliens noticed this and laughed even harder. To them, human anger was like watching a small animal try to look threatening. Thexka saw Jake's reaction and smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. "Look at him," the Krillian said. "Even now he does nothing. He sits there and takes our words like a beaten dog. This is what passes for a warrior among humans." The Krillian captain walked closer, to Jake's table. His massive form cast a shadow over the human. Up close, Jake could smell the alien's breath, thick with alcohol and something that reminded him of burning metal. "Tell me, little human," Thexka said, leaning down so his face was level with Jake's. "What is the biggest war your pathetic species has ever fought? How many of your people died? A few thousand, maybe tens of thousands." The tavern had gone completely quiet now. This was no longer just entertainment. It was becoming a confrontation. Other patrons leaned forward to watch. Some began placing bets on whether the human would run or try to fight. Jake finally looked up. His eyes met Thexka's burning red gaze. For a moment, neither moved. The human's face was calm, but there was something in his expression that made the Krillian's smile falter slightly. "You want to know about human war?" Jake asked quietly. His voice was steady, but it carried in the silence. Every alien in the tavern could hear him clearly. Thexka straightened up, his confidence returning. "Yes," the Krillian said. "Tell us about your greatest conflict. Amuse us with tales of your species fighting over scraps of dirt on your little world." Jake was quiet for a long moment. He seemed to be thinking, choosing his words carefully. When he spoke again, his voice was even softer than before. "Our biggest war," Jake said slowly, "killed 70 million people." The number hung in the air like a physical thing. Several aliens stopped laughing. Others looked confused, as if they had not heard correctly. Thexka blinked his 4 eyes in sequence. 70 million, he repeated. "That is impossible. No single world could support a war that large." Jake picked up his glass and took a small sip of the blue liquid. He set it down again before speaking. "It lasted 6 years, he said. "We called it the Second World War." The Shardak delegate made a sound, like crystal wind chimes. "Second?" it asked. "You mean there was a first?" Jake nodded slowly. "The first one killed about 20 million people, he said. We finished that one, took a break for 20 years, then started the second one. Now the tavern was completely silent. Even the background hum of the station's life support system seemed muted. Aliens who had been laughing moments before now stared at the human, with expressions ranging from confusion to disbelief. Vel 9 leaned forward across the bar. His ancient eyes were wide with something that might have been fear. "You fought 2 wars on one world that killed nearly 100 million beings total?" the Centaurian asked. Jake looked around the tavern, meeting the gaze of alien after alien. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. But in the silence, everyone could hear him perfectly. Those were just the big ones. The silence in Zephyr's Rest stretched on for what felt like hours. Jake could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. Around him, dozens of alien faces stared with expressions he had never seen before. The mockery was gone. The laughter had died. Thexka was the first to break the silence. The Krillian captain took a step back from Jake's table. His forearms hung at his sides, no longer gesturing wildly. "You are lying," Thexka said, but his voice lacked the confidence it had before. No single world could sustain such losses. Jake took another sip from his glass. The blue liquid was starting to taste less like metal and more like something bitter. He set the glass down and looked around the room again. Earth had about 2 billion people when the Second World War started, Jake said. By the time it ended, 70 million were dead. That's 1 out of every 30 people on the planet. The Vex delegate, 6 Prime, made a clicking sound that was different from before. This was not laughter. It was the sound its kind made when they were processing information that did not make sense. "The hive mind cannot comprehend this," 6 Prime said. "How does a species survive losing so many? How do you continue to exist?" Jake's expression did not change, but something shifted in his eyes. It was like looking into deep water and seeing shapes moving far below the surface. "We kept fighting," Jake said simply. The Shardak delegate leaned forward. The crystal being's body caught the tavern lights and threw rainbow patterns on the walls. "Explain this war," it said. "What enemy could cause such destruction on a single world?" Jake was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was steady but somehow heavier than before. "We fought ourselves," he said. This time the silence was different. It was not just the absence of sound. It was the presence of something else, understanding maybe, or fear. The Deepborn in its tank of green liquid made bubbling sounds. Its translators struggled to process what it was trying to say. "You fought your own species?" It finally managed. Jake nodded. "Humans against humans," he said. "The same species, from the same world, with the same technology and the same intelligence. We divided ourselves into groups and tried to destroy each other completely." A small alien that looked like a furry ball with too many eyes spoke up from a corner table. "Why?" it asked in a high, squeaky voice. Jake considered the question. "How do you explain ideology to beings who had never experienced it? How do you describe hate to species who had only fought for resources or territory?" "Different ideas about how to live," Jake said finally. "Different beliefs about who should have power. Different opinions about what kinds of people deserved to exist." The words fell into the silence like stones into still water. Ripples of unease spread through the crowd of aliens. Thexka sat down heavily in his chair. The Krillian's red skin had faded to a dull orange. He looked like he was trying to solve a puzzle with pieces that did not fit together. "Your species fights wars of ideology?" he asked. "Among other things," Jake said. He lifted his glass again but did not drink. Instead, he stared into the blue, liquid as if he could see something there that the aliens could not. "The Second World War started because one group of humans decided that other groups were not really human," Jake continued. "They built camps where they murdered millions of people, men, women, children. They had factories designed specifically for killing. Several aliens made sounds of distress. The concept of industrial murder was foreign to most species. Wars were fought for territory, resources, or survival. The idea of killing for ideology alone was almost incomprehensible. How many died in these camps?" the Shardak asked. 6 million, Jake said. "Just from one group of people, they killed others too. Millions more." The furry alien in the corner made a sound like a sob. "Your species has natural predators that do this?" it asked. Jake shook his head slowly. "No predators," he said, "just humans. Humans who decided that other humans were their enemies. Humans who built machines designed to kill humans as efficiently as possible." Vel 9 had been silent behind the bar, but now he spoke. His voice was barely above a whisper. "And you fought back?" "Eventually," Jake said. It took us a while to realize what was happening. By the time we did, the killing had spread across half the planet. We had to stop it. How? Zix Prime asked. Jake set his glass down and looked directly at the Vex delegate. We got better at killing than they were. The words hit the tavern like a physical blow. Several aliens actually flinched. Others made sounds that needed no translation. We built bigger bombs, Jake continued. We trained more soldiers. We turned our entire civilization into a weapon. Factories that made cars started making tanks. Scientists who studied medicine started studying poison gas. Artists painted propaganda posters. Children collected scrap metal for bullets. He paused, looking around the room at faces that were no longer skeptical or amused. We fought them in the snow and in the desert and in the jungle, Jake said. We fought them in the air and on the sea and under the ground. We fought them in cities and in fields and in mountains. We fought them until one side could not fight anymore. The reptilian trader who had mocked human weapons earlier was now staring at Jake with something that looked like horror. You said, this lasted 6 years? The reptilian asked. 6 years, Jake confirmed. Every day, somewhere on Earth, humans were killing other humans. Sometimes thousands died in a single day, sometimes in a single hour. The Deepborn made more bubbling sounds. Its translator was working frantically. How many humans fought in this war? It asked. Jake thought for a moment. Over 100 million people were in uniform at some point, he said. But that does not count the civilians who built weapons, grew food, nursed the wounded, or did 1,000 other jobs to keep the war machine running. Almost everyone on the planet was involved somehow. Thexka looked around the tavern as if seeing it for the first time. Your entire species was at war with itself, he said. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact that the Krillian was trying to process. Jake nodded. And when it was over, he said, we looked at what we had done to each other and we swore it would never happen again. The silence that followed was the deepest yet. In that quiet, Jake picked up his glass and finished the blue liquid in one swallow. When he set it down, the sound seemed as loud as thunder. Then, 25 years later, we started fighting in Korea. The mention of Korea hung in the air like smoke from a fire that would not die. Jake could see the confusion in the alien faces around him. They were trying to understand how a species could promise to never fight again, then break that promise so quickly. Vel 9 moved closer to Jake's table. The old Centaurian's many eyes were fixed on the human with an intensity that made Jake uncomfortable. You said 25 years later? Vel 9 said carefully. Your species fought another war after losing 70 million people? Jake nodded slowly. Korea lasted 3 years. Then there was Vietnam for almost 20 years. Then there were smaller wars, always smaller wars. He gestured to the empty glass in front of him. Vel 9 refilled it without being asked. The blue liquid swirled in the glass like a tiny storm. You have to understand, Jake continued. Humans do not learn from war the way other species might. We do not avoid it because it is costly. We study it, we get better at it. Thexka leaned forward in his chair. The Krillian's red skin had now faded to a pale pink. He looked like he was struggling with a fever. Explain Vietnam, Thexka said. Jake took a sip from his fresh drink. The taste was getting easier to handle. Maybe that was a bad sign. A country split in two, Jake said. Different ideas about government. One side asked for help from other humans who shared their ideas. The other side did the same. Pretty soon it was not just their war anymore. The Shardak made its glass-breaking sound again, but this time it sounded more like pain than amusement. How many died in this Vietnam? It asked. About 3 million, Jake said. Most of them were not soldiers. The words landed like physical blows. Several aliens actually stepped back. The concept of civilian casualties seemed to disturb them, more than military deaths. Zix Prime's mandibles clicked rapidly. The Vex was processing information at the speed of its hive mind, and it did not like what it was calculating. 3 million in 20 years of fighting, Zix Prime said. Your species maintained a war for 2 decades. On and off, Jake said. Sometimes it was very active. Sometimes it was quieter, but people kept dying the whole time. He set his glass down and looked around the tavern. The aliens were listening, with an attention that bordered on desperation, like they needed to understand something that was fundamentally alien to their experience. The thing about Vietnam, Jake continued, is that it showed us something important about human war. We learned that we could fight a conflict on the other side of our planet, keep it going for decades, and most people back home would just live their lives. The Deepborn made bubbling sounds that its translator could not process for several seconds. Your species can wage war and peace simultaneously? It finally asked. That is exactly right, Jake said. While soldiers fought and died in the jungles, people in other parts of Earth went to work, raised families, built cities. War became just another thing that was happening somewhere else. The furry alien in the corner made a sound like crying. How? Is this possible? It asked. Jake considered the question. How do you explain the human capacity to compartmentalize horror? How do you describe a species that can watch war on television while eating dinner? Practice, Jake said finally. He lifted his glass again, then set it down without drinking. By the time Vietnam ended, humans had been fighting wars for thousands of years. We had learned how to do it without destroying our entire civilization. We could fight in one place while building in another. Thexka stood up abruptly. The Krillian began pacing around his table again, but this time his movements were agitated, nervous. This is impossible, Thexka said. No species can sustain constant warfare. The resources alone would bankrupt any civilization. Jake watched the alien pace for a moment before responding. That is where you are wrong, Jake said quietly. War does not bankrupt human civilization. War drives it. The silence that followed was different from the others. This one felt dangerous, like the moment before lightning strikes. Explain, the Shardak demanded. Jake leaned back in his chair. For the first time since the conversation began, he looked almost relaxed. But there was something in his posture that reminded Vel 9 of a predator that had decided to stop hiding. Every major advance in human technology came from war, Jake said. Flight, computers, medicine, space travel, nuclear power. We learned all of it because we needed better ways to kill each other. He gestured around the tavern. The engine that brought me to this station? We developed it from rockets we built to drop bombs on other humans. The medical knowledge that keeps me alive in alien atmospheres? We learned it by treating soldiers who had been shot, burned, and poisoned by other humans. The reptilian trader made a hissing sound that was not laughter. Your species advances through conflict? It asked. Not through conflict, Jake corrected. Through preparing for conflict. Humans are always getting ready for the next war, even when we are not fighting one. Zix Prime's clicking became faster and more urgent. The hive mind requires clarification, it said. Are you saying that human technological development is driven by military necessity? Jake nodded. Almost entirely. We went to our moon because we wanted to prove we could hit any target on Earth with a missile. We built our first computers to calculate artillery trajectories. We developed antibiotics to keep soldiers fighting longer. The Deepborn's translator was working overtime to process the alien's agitated bubbling. Your species weaponizes everything? It asked. Not everything, Jake said. But we look at everything and ask ourselves how it could be used in a fight. It is just how we think. Vel 9 moved even closer to Jake's table. The Centaurian's ancient voice was barely above a whisper. How many wars has your species fought? He asked. Jake was quiet for a long time. He seemed to be counting something in his head. Major wars? Hundreds, he said finally. Smaller conflicts? Thousands. There has not been a single year in recorded human history when we were not fighting somewhere. The tavern had become a tomb. Even the background noise of the station seemed to have stopped. In that silence, Jake continued speaking in his calm, steady voice. We have fought over land, resources, religion, ideology, trade routes, and pride. We have fought with sticks and stones, swords and arrows, guns and bombs, and weapons that can destroy entire cities in seconds. He picked up his glass and drained it completely. And the strangest part, Jake said, setting the empty glass down with a soft click. We are getting better at it every year. The silence stretched on until Thexka finally found his voice. What? Is the longest your species has gone without fighting a war? The Krillian asked. Jake thought about it for a moment. I am not sure we ever have, he said. Jake sat in the silence for a long moment, watching the faces around him. The aliens looked like they had seen something that broke their understanding of how the universe worked. Some stared at him with wide eyes. Others looked away, as if they could not bear to meet his gaze. The furry alien in the corner was making soft whimpering sounds. The reptilian trader had wrapped its arms around itself like it was cold. Even the Deepborn had stopped bubbling in its tank, floating motionless in the green liquid. Vel 9 moved behind the bar like he was walking through a nightmare. The old Centaurian had lived for centuries and seen the rise and fall of entire civilizations. But nothing had prepared him for this conversation. There is something else, Jake said quietly. Every alien in the tavern turned to look at him. Some made sounds of protest, as if they could not handle any more revelations. But Jake continued speaking in his calm, steady voice. You asked about our greatest wars, he said. You wanted to know about our military victories. But I have not told you the most important thing yet. Thexka had slumped back in his chair. The proud Krillian warrior looked defeated, drained of all his earlier arrogance. What? Thexka asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jake picked up his empty glass and turned it slowly in his hands. We are not particularly good at war, he said. The statement hung in the air like a challenge to everything they had just heard. Several aliens made sounds of confusion. Not good? Zix Prime clicked. Your species has fought continuously for thousands of years. You have weapons that can destroy cities. How are you not good at war? Jake set the glass down and looked directly at the Vex delegate. Because we had to learn it all by fighting ourselves, he said. Every strategy, every tactic, every weapon we have ever developed, we learned by using it against other humans. The silence deepened. Jake could hear alien breathing, the hum of life support systems, the distant sound of ships docking at the station. But inside the tavern, nothing moved. Other species fight aliens, Jake continued. You fight beings who think differently, who have different technologies, different weaknesses. That makes you strong against those specific enemies, but it also makes you predictable. He gestured around the room. Humans fight humans. We fight enemies who know all our tricks because they invented half of them. We fight enemies who are just as smart as we are, just as desperate, just as willing to do anything to win. The Shardak made a sound like crystal breaking in slow motion. You have been at war with yourselves for millennia, it said. You have been teaching yourselves to kill yourselves. Exactly, Jake said. Every human military leader has studied the same battles, learned from the same mistakes, read the same books about strategy. When we fight each other, we are fighting enemies who know everything we know. Thexka leaned forward, his 4 eyes wide with something that might have been terror. What does that make you? He asked. Jake's expression did not change, but something shifted in the air around him. When he spoke, his voice was softer than before, but somehow it carried more weight. Adaptable, he said. The word fell into the silence like a stone into deep water. Human military doctrine is not based on fighting weaker enemies or using superior technology, Jake continued. It is based on the assumption that our enemy is exactly as intelligent and well-equipped as we are. Maybe more so. He stood up slowly, and several aliens actually flinched backward. We plan for enemies who know our plans. We prepare for opponents who have studied our weaknesses. We assume that whatever advantage we have today, our enemy will have tomorrow. Jake walked to the center of the tavern. The aliens parted before him like he was carrying a disease. So we learned to fight dirty, he said. We learned to adapt faster than our enemies could counter. We learned to win wars not through strength or superior technology, but through being more flexible, more creative, more willing to change everything at a moment's notice. The Deepborn's translator finally managed to process its frantic bubbling. You learned to fight intelligently? It asked. We learned to fight intelligently against intelligent enemies, Jake corrected. There is a difference. He looked around the tavern, meeting the gaze of every alien present. When humans finally left Earth and met other species, Jake said, we discovered something interesting. Most of you fight the way you have always fought. You use the same strategies, the same technologies, the same thinking that worked against your traditional enemies. Vel 9 gripped the edge of the bar with all 6 of his hands. And humans? He asked. Jake's smile was small and cold. Humans look at every species we meet and ask ourselves one question, he said. How would we fight them if we had to? The tavern erupted in gasps and sounds of alarm. Several aliens stood up as if preparing to flee. Others made defensive gestures, with whatever they used for hands. We study your ship designs and figure out their weak points, Jake continued, his voice cutting through the noise. We analyze your biology and learn what would hurt you. We watch your military exercises and develop counters to your tactics. Thexka's red skin had gone completely pale. You are planning to fight us? He asked. Jake shook his head. We are planning for the possibility that we might have to fight you, he said. There is a difference. He walked back to his table and sat down. Humans have a saying, Jake said. If you want peace, prepare for war. We have been preparing for war for so long that we have become very, very good at it. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the station's background noise seemed to have stopped. The thing is, Jake said, picking up his empty glass again, we do not want to fight you. We came to the galaxy looking for friends, for trade partners, for new ideas and new perspectives. He set the glass down and looked around the room. One more time. But if someone forces us to fight, he said quietly, we will be ready. Jake stood up and walked toward the exit. As he reached the door, he turned back to face the silent tavern. You asked about human warfare, he said. You wanted to know about our military history. Now you know. He paused for a moment, looking at all the alien faces staring back at him. We did not learn to fight by conquering other worlds, Jake said. We learned to fight by nearly destroying our own. We did not become warriors by defeating alien enemies. We became warriors by defeating ourselves over and over again, until we learned how to win against enemies who think exactly like we do. The door slid open behind him. Sleep well, Jake said, and walked out into the corridor. The door closed behind him with a soft hiss. Inside Zephyr's Rest, nobody moved for a long time. Finally, Vel 9 broke the silence. I think, the old Centaurian said quietly, it is time we all stopped talking about war. Nobody disagreed.